Hello?
Hello, hello.
Hello, magandang gabi. Hi.
Magandang gabi.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, are we ready to start?
Yes.
Yes. I'd like to welcome everyone to this program. Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. Welcome to this special event called Diwa Conversations of the Peace Muna, a peace and well-being initiative of the Brahma Kumaris Philippines, a non-governmental organization to personal transformation and world renewal. The BK Philippines is affiliated with the Brahma Kumaris, an international NGO, non-governmental organization of the United Nations, accredited with consultative status with Economic and Social Council. Today is a finale event, the 31st episode of Lusog Diwa Conversations on the topic, a celebration, arts open to the world. For those who are not Filipino language speakers, Lusog Diwa can be extended as well-being. Well-being, such a beautiful concept. And actually, it sounds nice in Filipino also. In today's world of chaos and divisiveness, the need for harmony and interconnectedness is real. And its value has never been more urgent. Now, more than ever, we think and act and love as one. This is the true spirit of. So I'll be introducing our guests for tonight. We're very happy that they could join us. Very prominent people, busy people, and a lot of wisdom to share. First, the UK sister, Genti Kierpalani. She is the regional director of UK and Europe, Brahma Kumaris. Sister Genti has been the organization's representative in Geneva since 1982. She is director of the International Coordinating Office of the Brahma Kumaris in London, as well as a director of centers from 31 countries in Europe and the Middle East. She serves as an advisor to the Council of the World's Religions and is also a member of the Executive Committee of the World Congress of Faiths, as well as a member of the advisory body of the International Center. As an emissary of for the last 50 years, she delivers a unique blend of Eastern wisdom and Western education, imparting the deepest spiritual truths with great clarity. Good evening from the Philippines, Sister Genti. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Yes. And our next other guest tonight, I'm saying tonight because here in the Philippines, I realize I'm not in the Philippines, but it's evening here. His Excellency Most Reverend Joel Z. Bailon, Bishop of the Diocese of Legazpi, which is in the Bicol region. Bishop Joel Bailon has been the Bishop of the Diocese of Legazpi in 2009 up to the. He first served in the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines as its Assistant Secretary General, and then for more than a decade, he served in the CBCP as chair on the Episcopal Commission of Youth for 8 years, and for 5 years as the bishop in charge of the youth desk of the Office of the Lady and Family of the Federation of the Asian Bishops. At present, he is CBCP Episcopal Commission of Prison Pastoral Care. So welcome also, Bishop Joel Bailon, joining us.
Thank you very much, Javi, and thank you for inviting me to this evening sharing. Sister Gianni, good evening.
Good evening to you.
Yes, we're all looking forward to your sharing, the sharing of the both of you tonight. But before we begin our live, we have a message from Her Excellency, Vice President Maria Leonor Lenny Robredo.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you are all keeping safe and well. Congratulations to all of the participants and organizers of your weekly Lusog Diwa conversations. Your message of self-care and mindfulness continues to provide a sense of anchorage to many of our countrymen. And this is especially relevant given the many changes that we have had to face due to COVID-19. These changes have been harder for some more than others. Thousands of families grieve over the death of loved ones. An estimated millions have lost jobs and livelihood, while many more struggle with uncertainty for their futures. These shifts have caused extraordinary anxiety, which can imbalance our well-being. For some, times of great hardship can drive us into our own personal bubbles of self-interest as an impulse to protect ourselves from further harm. Platforms like yours create an avenue for people to share their experiences. As we hear of the struggles and triumphs of others, so do we come to understand the common human spirit that binds us all. So are we collectively healed because each comes to be enlivened by the insight we do not struggle alone. And so are we collectively called to action because we come to understand that the only way through any hardship is together. This is the very philosophy that animates the Filipino spirit of bayanihan. We are very fortunate at the Office of the Vice President to see this in action every day. Throughout the pandemic and through the recent typhoons, so many Filipinos have stepped forward as volunteers for preparing food packs, donors to our partner foundation, or as members of organizations that work with us to make our projects more impactful. They have given generously, each in their own way, and proved that we respond to the worst of times with the best in ourselves. So continue with what you are doing and widen your circles of compassion. Look for more spaces where we can work with those who share our values, combine our networks and resources, and achieve more than we would if we acted by ourselves. Let us continue looking for more of us to do the work, more of us to rise to the moment, and widen the path for others to follow in our pursuit of a fairer, kinder, more humane world. I am certain that with you among our ranks, this world is closer to reality. Thank you, and may you continue to have meaningful and insightful conversations.
Thank you, Vice President Robredo. That was a very meaningful and relevant message. We all know that the Vice President has been working nonstop addressing the various issues related to the pandemic. And then she did a detour and did a lot of relief. We were hit by consecutive typhoons all over Luzon. So that set their appeal to unity, appeal to mutual support, and helping each other at the time. I would like to ask Sister Genty, start off. How do you view global economy and interconnectedness, and how do you think these should be applied in the situation that we're facing in the world today?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share. And here in London, it's morning, so good morning to everyone. And I see that two things have happened through the year that have made us aware that we are one family, we share one home, one planet, and we're all in the same boat together. It's not that you're in a separate boat because you're far away from London and I'm in a different boat. In fact, it is the one boat, this one planet that is protecting us and caring for us and taking all the good care that we've had so far from nature. Climate change has perhaps taken a little bit of a backseat with COVID-19, but I know that the Philippines has been in the direct hit line of typhoons, and that has happened not just this year, but for many, many years. And so maybe some people think that it's part of nature, but in fact, probably the statistics will show that the intensity of the storms and also the frequency of the storms, and also I think the havoc that has been wreaked through all of this has been exceptional. And it has continued to rise further and further. And that's not just in the Philippines, but go across to the other side of the world and in the Atlantic Ocean. Again, we've had reports of many, many hurricanes and typhoons. So climate change definitely is a very, very powerful reminder that we are all together in the same situation. And so all of us need to come together and deal with things together. And if that wasn't enough, of course, COVID started in one corner of the world, but it swept across the whole world. And today there isn't a single country that is free, whether it's in the north or the south or the developing world or the developed world, has made no difference whatsoever. Everybody has been impacted by COVID-19. And so once again, external circumstances are making us aware of a very deep spiritual awareness and understanding that we are actually one family. And the only way to be able to deal with all these external things is just as a normal family would do. A normal family comes together and shares their talents and skills and resources to help everyone. And so this is what we also have to learn to do. And yes, I'm sure that there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that this program is part of that reminder that together we can deal with all the challenges and move towards the light.
Yes. Thank you for that very hopeful message, Sister Genti. I just want to ask a follow-up. You mentioned the two crises facing the world today, change and COVID, the pandemic. It just so happens those are the two problems we had in recent years that affects everyone. And as a representative of Brahma Kumaris to the United Nations, how are you sharing this message to your colleagues in the United Nations, and referring to your view of as in every family there are dysfunctional? How do you convince members of the family who may not agree with you? Hard question.
From the year 2009, I personally have been participating in the climate change conferences organized by the UN each year, except of course this year it couldn't happen. It's going to happen next year again. And what we found was that the message that we were sharing in the initial period was a little bit taken with a pinch of salt. Is it really like that? Because our message was that consciousness impacts climate. And so a person could say, here's a typhoon. What has that got to do with what I'm thinking? But in fact, human consciousness means that because we've had this sense of taking for the self and exploiting nature and creating an aggression and disruptive force in nature, what we've done is to create upheaval within the entire ecosystem. And so our materialism, our greed, our consumerism has created this situation where now everything is out of sync. And if we come back to a change of consciousness in which we understand that I have to remove aggression and desires from here and develop awareness and contentment so that I can then serve nature, it's going to make a huge difference. And some people might think that we're at the verge of a point of no return with climate change. But in fact, if even today, and of course, the hopeful news was the 2015 Paris Accord. And if countries truly were to follow that and even have higher ambition than that, there is still the possibility we could minimize the risks. So that's one thing. And today I found that nobody is dismissive of that awareness of consumerism and the impact it's having on the climate. I think the days of climate skeptics have come to an end. And then secondly, with COVID, hope is an incredibly powerful factor in increasing our own immunity. And of course, the cleanliness, the hygiene, and social distancing, all of these things are important. But if we can raise our hopes and if we can maintain a vision in which there's optimism and positivity, then that isn't a denial of reality, but it's actually the way forward. And yes, of course, we now have vaccines that have come on the scene at a much, much faster rate than we could ever have imagined at the beginning of the year. And so we do have the defenses that can help the whole of humanity. And a beautiful thing that I've observed is that all the big pharma companies have come together, not in competition, but in collaboration to make this happen, because they're seeing that the decimation of the population is not going to be healthy for anyone. And so they're supporting each other to be able to create a method so that not only have the vaccines been produced, but also they can be distributed in an equitable way so that people from north and south can all take benefit. So very, very hopeful signs for both factors at this moment.
Thank you so much, Sister. I'd like to ask Bishop Joel Bailon now, because I know that he can discuss the latest encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, also touches on similar global themes that were discussed just now. Bishop Joel, give us a general summary of the encyclical. Why is this important at this time? It's a very comprehensive and lengthy statement by the Pope. But what is your main takeaway from this, Bishop Joel?
Yes, thank you, Howie. And indeed, it is quite a lengthy statement, but also very relevant and quite pointed. As Sister Jayanti just mentioned, that we are all in one boat. And I think generally that's what the Holy Father is also saying in Fratelli Tutti. As a matter of fact, the very title itself, Fratelli Tutti, is brothers and sisters all. What does he mean by that? Using St. Francis's very words in his admonition to his brothers and sisters, that they are being sent to be brothers and sisters to everyone. Well, the first thing that the Holy Father pointed out in the very first chapter of Fratelli Tutti, which he interestingly titles Dark Clouds Over a Closed World. So he's talking about a closed world, a world that has developed a culture of walls, he says. A culture of walls in the heart, walls on the land, walls that become, as a matter of fact, at the end, the very imprisonment, the very walls that imprison people because it prevents them from reaching out. Walls of indifference, walls of suspicion, walls of judgment, walls of taking advantage of the weak, the poor, the migrant, the criminal, the drug addict, things like this. And the Holy Father is saying that that is not the way with the world. If we are going to move as a one world, we are in this boat together, we better destroy this culture of walls and instead build a culture of encounter. And very interestingly, the second chapter, as a way to move forward, he said there is a beautiful imagery that the Lord Jesus used in the gospel, a very familiar parable, and that is the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan image was used by the Holy Father in this encyclical to teach us about what it is to encounter people, to be vulnerable enough and embrace people's suffering, so that we may be able to understand, we may be able to be connected in joy and in sorrow, in pain and in triumph, in life and in death. But we have to learn to be connected to each other. And we can only do that if we reach out, if we don't close our walls, our doors to each other, and risk being vulnerable. And unfortunately, the world is teaching us to be that, to be suspicious. That is why Sister Jayanti also mentioned about this globalization, this culture of what do you call this, empiricalism, of being very practical and only catering to the self, to our selfishness, therefore becoming indifferent and deaf to the needs of others. So this is what the Holy Father is inviting us to, and this can be done not only on the individual level, but all the way to even political, in the political world, where governments precisely have developed this kind of attitude where they take advantage. As a matter of fact, this the term "open to the world," the Holy Father acknowledges that this has been co-opted by certain groups, certain governments, in fact, power groups that have used this in order to pursue a selfish ideology, not so much to be open to the world in order to embrace the world, but to be open to the world in order to take advantage of the world, in order to cater to the needs of the self instead of being caring for the other, especially the weaker ones. So this is where the Holy Father is inviting us to be able to develop this world harmony by learning to encounter one another, to develop this culture of encounter that he talks about.
Thank you, Bishop Joel. Just a quick follow-up. You know, part of the papal encyclical also addressed the pandemic. And he was quite pointed in his criticism of the world, actually. He said that the COVID pandemic is a reflection of our disunity. It shows a fragmented world, yes. Which he found ironic because we are also very interconnected through the internet, which he also discussed in the encyclical. But at the same time, he strikes an optimistic note.
Yes,
he said the common experience of the pandemic may have shown that countries were not united, governments were not united, but it has given the world a reason to unite, because it is probably the most common problem of our time, perhaps only comparable to climate change.
Yes. I think Sister Jayanti already pointed this out very well earlier when she talked about how the COVID pandemic has indeed affected the entire world, all of us. We could not be indifferent anymore. And all of a sudden, we could not help it but be there to experience our dependency on each other, that we are powerless before this unknown enemy. We do not know how to address it. We do not know how to control it. We don't know how to stop it. And therefore, the only way to do it is to look around and look for help from one another. And this is what the Holy Father is telling us now, to recognize that this pandemic is making us aware of our connectedness, of our interconnectedness, that we can help each other, that we can work together in order to address this. And it is not only a matter of solving the problem medically, which hopefully and thankfully we have the vaccine, we have solutions now, but it goes deeper precisely to the attitudes, the ideologies that we have developed to such a point that we have become so selfish and become indifferent. Now the world is suffering all these difficulties, climate, what do you call this, inclement weather, climate change, the floodings, and like in my province, we just suffered from 5 typhoons about a month ago, and we're still reeling from the effects of this terrible disaster. And we have not even gotten over a recent eruption of the volcano, Mayon volcano. In 2018, she erupted, and it dislodged 84,000 families. So it's all this. But what is happening, and I think this is what the Holy Father is saying, that when we reach out, when we help one another, we are able to solve problems. This is a very personal experience here in the province. I look at the way people, not only because I'm grateful that people from outside are helping us, having learned that there is so much pain and devastation here, suffering, even deaths. People just naturally and immediately responded to the realities of our difficulties. But what is more interesting is deep inside the province itself, families who have also suffered destruction and devastation had been generously giving and reaching out to those who are more affected, those who are suffering. And for me, this is quite significant. This is something that allows us to discover the goodness of the Spirit in the human heart, that goodness to reach out, to be generous, to be compassionate, as the Vice President said in her message earlier. And this is what the message of the Holy Father, Fratelli Tutti, is all about. So it ends with a positive note, inviting not only individuals, like I said, but governments, the whole world, that we work together.
I'd like to go back to Sister Genty and ask her, these problems that we've been discussed, climate change and the pandemic in particular. Very often, solutions being discussed are science-based and technological. But what could be the role of spirituality, interfaith, in addressing these problems?
I think that the basic cause of all of these problems is a spiritual factor, in the sense that we heard some beautiful examples from the Bishop of families supporting and helping, but unfortunately, this is the exception rather than the norm. And so what we found across the world globally is that the basic human values of loving and caring and sharing and giving support and inspiration have been missing to a great extent. And so COVID has come as a very, very powerful reminder that we can't manage on our own. And the Holy Father is absolutely correct. When we come together as brothers and sisters of one family, and we keep that awareness of sharing. I know you mentioned dysfunctional families, but hopefully whatever has been the dysfunctionality, we are now able to sort that out and again come back to that spiritual consciousness. And maybe we look different, maybe we follow different traditions even, maybe we even have different food and language and everything else is different. But if we come together, at the heart of every tradition are the human values that we all share. And so now when we are reminded of this, that we are one family, and we come back to that essence of what humanity is about, and the word karuna in Hindi, it's connected with the word karuna, and karuna means compassion. So karuna has come to remind us of compassion again. And so as we come back to that awareness, our attitude and our behavior will be very, very different. And of course, even in terms of climate change, it's been the reaction of simply materialism in which we've forgotten how sacred nature is. And all the traditions have reminded us that we have a responsibility towards nature. We are stewards. We do not possess nature. We do not own it. We didn't bring it with ourselves, but the universe provided this for all of us to enjoy, but also to care for and look after. And in the last 50 years, of course, it's been a long time that this has taken place, but especially in the last 50 years, we've really gone overboard with our aggression and exploitation. And so to come back to that sanctity, that nature is a gift that we have been given. And so to treat nature with respect means that we are also actually treating all forms of life with respect. And today what we found is that without a spiritual consciousness, neither do I respect myself, which is why there's so many problems with addictional behavior, because we've forgotten about our own spiritual identity. And so we don't have that value and respect for our own spiritual identity. And now if I can develop that, then I'm going to be able to respect not only myself, but I'm going to be able to respect you and the value of your human life. But I'm also going to be able to respect all forms of life, but also I'm going to be able to respect nature and treat nature with the dignity and the respect that it deserves. And I think that this is the attitude and awareness that we all need to bring within ourselves at this moment. St. Francis of Assisi, of course, beautiful reminder of everything, not just human beings, my brothers and sisters, but the moon, the sun, everything is my brother and sister. And so that all-encompassing vision that everything is sacred and important is a very important attitude to develop.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very articulate explanation. The need for spiritual solutions to our present problems. I would just because you're also representing your organization or a movement in the United Nations, which is a secular organization, and we know that a lot of the problems of the world also have political roots and also call for political solutions. And I just would like to know your view, Sister Genti, whether to what extent should religious people be advocating for solutions? What is their role?
I'll give you one particular example that I've been involved with, and that is the whole subject of climate change, of course. And some years ago, when we first started participating in these events, people really who were into activism said, well, what can people of faith offer in the whole subject of environment and climate change? They don't say that anymore. For the last several years, people from faith-based organizations have been welcomed onto platforms organized by activists and governments in which we are being asked to share a spiritual perspective. And so I think that there's a big change of attitude. I'll give you another example. Some years ago, when COP took place in Bonn in Germany, UNESCO had on its big stand, very lovely big stand, it had as its header, changing minds, not climate. And I thought the message has got through, that it's a question of changing hearts and minds. Then you can impact climate change. And I also have to say that the woman who is the executive secretary for climate change, Mrs. Christiana Figueres, she, I don't know whether she would call herself spiritual or not, but her views are very deeply optimistic and based on a spiritual consciousness and understanding. And she approached the Paris Accord with a spirit that was full of optimism. And I would say that optimism is not a political value. Optimism is very much something that comes from the heart. And it's not based on just a dream or a vision, But optimism, which is based in a reality that human beings can achieve whatever it is they set out to do, that optimism actually was the foundation to be able to get the whole world to come to an agreement. Can you imagine where even 5 brothers and sisters squabble? Now multiply that and make it 5 countries. Now multiply that and make it 220 countries. And so it was quite a task. But she approached that task with a strategy that she describes as stubborn optimism. And of course, yes, there was strategy, there was science, there were all the facts and information that she had, and the whole department was working together as one. But the Paris Accord was finally agreed. And nobody could have believed that 10 years earlier, that it's going to be possible. It felt as if it was a dream. But when someone has that spiritual awareness and that consciousness that, yes, I can be an instrument. I can't just sit back helplessly and say that, oh, it's not possible, it's beyond our capacity. But no, one individual can impact 100 others, and they can impact many others. And so that wave can grow, and that groundswell can make things change.
Thank you. Gosh, that was a very clear explanation again. I'd like to ask Bishop a similar question. As you know, Bishop Joel, the papal encyclical Fratelli Tutti was as much a political statement as it was a spiritual statement. I mean, the Pope touched on a wide range of secular topics, very timely topics, including the internet and trolls and that kind of thing. But he was also quite critical of our whole way of approaching economic development. You know, he was quite critical of neoliberalism and the consumerist
and ideologies yes. that cater to the selfishness of the human person.
Yeah, but what kind of leaped out to me because of its in particular relevance in the Philippines at this time was his critique of populist political regimes.
Yes.
We know that the Philippine Church has not had a perfect relationship with our current populist regime in the Philippines. I'm wondering, Bishop, what your view is about the Pope's thinking on the church's role in political change and its role in the defense of certain values like human rights and democracy and freedom. To what extent should the church be involved in protecting those values in the political realm?
Yes. So yes, indeed, Howie, although the Holy Father and certainly prudently did not mention particular names, when we spoke of populist leaders that are, and you know that it wasn't only referring to the Philippines, the context of the Philippines, but in so many other, nations. But at the same time, he was very, very, very much, focused on saying that these kinds of mindset, these kinds of ideology, these kinds of ways of leading people do not really help. Eventually, he would say that these are simply destroying precisely hope and the dignity of people. But I would like to focus on if there was any political definite statement in Fratelli Tutti is when he mentioned about 2 important realities that he wanted stopped: war and the death penalty. He said these are things that destroy. They destroy nations, they destroy individuals. War destroys nations. And in fact, in the first chapter, he was quite optimistic. He said, immediately after the Great Wars, it seems that nations have learned that that violence and war wasn't going to be the solution to our differences and difficulties. So there was this effort on the part of nations. In Europe, there was the European Union. He said in Latin America, there's a similar effort, and everywhere else there was these things. But then he said recently, after these decades of efforts, it seems that we are going back. There is some signs of regression. And again, there are wars everywhere. We are focusing even more. And as a matter of fact, us being here in the Philippines, we are very much concerned that it might be here where the Third World War would happen because of all the tensions in the West Philippine Sea. Nations are fighting over these territories and all that. But the Holy Father said, no matter what you do, war will not solve the problems. And therefore, there must be effort on the part of nations to stop this. There are other forms of solving difficulties. Dialogue is one of them. Reaching out and trying to understand. And of course, he said that in every political action, in every political decision, human rights must be always at the center. Human rights, respect for human rights. Whether you are a first world country or a third world country, we all have human rights. And on a very personal level, in a very personal context, he focuses on the death penalty. It has a very personal meaning for me and significance because, like you mentioned, Howie, earlier, I am at present the chair of the Episcopal Commission on Prison Pastoral Care here in the Philippines, of the Catholic Bishops' Conference here. And so it was really a very hopeful statement on the part of the Holy Father because we had been fighting. You are quite aware that as soon as the President Duterte finished his, or towards the end of his recent State of the Nation address, he instructed Congress as a priority, bill, the approval or the restoration of the death penalty. And our office started to, our network, we have this coalition against the death penalty, to say no to it. Well, from the very start, the death penalty never solves the problem of crime. No studies have proven that. It is not a deterrent. Secondly, it is a total disregard of the dignity of the human person. No human being, no matter how evil he might have become, loses his or her dignity. It will always be there, that we will be a creation of this creative being whom we call God. And he has the right to take that away from us. No one, not even a government, no matter how just that government may be, or no matter how holy a person may be, may judge a person and condemn him to, or her to death. So I was very happy when the Holy Father said that the death penalty is inadmissible, and he has already instructed that our present catechism for the Catholic Church be changed. As a matter of fact, this was already done before he even came up with the Fratelli Tutti, that the wordings there should already do away with, yes, at a certain point we can justify this or that. Even just war, there is no such thing as just war. Now, war will always be unjust because it destroys nations, it destroys peoples, it destroys families, it destroys the world. And so if there is any political statement that are very strong in Fratelli Tutti, it is about these two things. Of course, he talked about economic, and I'm sure Sister Jayanti has already mentioned this earlier as well.
Just a quick follow-up, Bishop. No, now that the Pope has highlighted this, it seems like your own personal advocacy against the death penalty. How will people like you on the front lines? You're there in Bicol. You have a wide constituency, local constituency yourself. How are you going to move the Pope's message forward so that it can maybe even reverse this momentum in the Philippines towards reviving the death penalty? Because as you know, there is some strong public opinion in the Philippines to revive the death penalty.
Yes. There are actually two things that we are doing as far as the commission is concerned. First of all, is like I said, we have put more emphasis on the coalition that we have. There's this coalition against death penalty. It is both secular and religious. Government and non-government agencies are here. We are gathered together, and we have strongly spoken out in this regard. We are sharing our opinions and our resistance to the death penalty. We have reached out to those senators in particular, because we hope that with the Senate, since there are fewer people to address and get in touch with, we would have greater chances of winning this fight rather than in Congress, because for that matter, a good high percentage of our congressmen, our congress people are what I call this kind of what beholden to the president and all that, and it's very difficult to sway them here and there. But with the senators, because we have identified that, I think there from the last count there were already 8 who were definitely no, and the rest were still some of them were yes, I think no, some I think 10 were yes for the death penalty, 8 were no, and the others who were still not decisive or have not decided on whether to say yes or no. Those are the senators we have reached out to. At the same time, we have also identified those senators who, even though they said yes, they could be swayed because there are certain qualifications in their saying yes. There are certain conditions that they're saying, I'm saying yes to this if this is going to be there. Like, for example, heinous crimes and big plunder, for example, and all that those deserve the death penalty. But anyway, we are trying to convince them that there are other ways to make these persons accountable rather than just simply imposing the death penalty on them. That's the first thing. The second thing that we are doing is we are reaching out to the other commissions, especially the youth. We are engaging the young because the young are in the social media. They are what do you call this? There's internet savvy. They have the technology. They know. So we are asking them to come up with what do you call this? Short quips. They posts. They use Instagram, whatever what do you call portals they may have, in order to raise consciousness among our people. And this we have also started. In the diocese, we have what do you call this? We have our prison ministry. And it is this through the prison ministry that we are being able to disseminate the information about the value of human life. And we had always been what do you call this, defending life in its different forms, whether it is the unborn, whether it is the poor that are being taken advantage of, even those who are victims of these our security concerns between the rebels and the government and all that. There are families that are caught in between. As a matter of fact, very recently, there have been killings in my diocese. And this very much related to this suspicion of being rebels. So there are many reasons for us to do advocacy already, but mostly in the defense of the value of human life, not particularly just to say no to the death penalty, but to preserve, protect, and defend the dignity of the human person, and to defend life as holy and the what do you call this, something that we cannot take away from people, but only God has the right to do that.
Well, thank you for that optimistic message as well. Sister Jessie, I know that you're involved in promoting dialogue among different cultures and faiths. Do you think we're making progress on this global dialogue? Because we do know that a lot of conflicts in recent decades have had religious roots. So what can you tell us about the progress that has been made in terms of promoting this dialogue and peace between the faiths?
What I've found is that interfaith groups have come together in every nation. And I think even in the Philippines, the fact that we have our dear bishop with us today engaging in dialogue. I represent an organization from the East and not part of a traditional religion, but a new religious movement. And so the fact that the two of us can share a platform, and actually our ideas are not so different. If you've been hearing what he's been saying and myself, as you have been intently, you can see that our ideas do come together. We have many, many shared values. And so this is one little example of something that's happening right now, and it's happening across the world. Even with climate change, there's a whole group of faith-based organizations that work together. And what I've found is that because there is a single purpose that we're working towards, we are willing to set aside our philosophical differences and those theoretical ideas and come together and work together and collaborate together, which I think is the important thing at this moment. So we're not going to sit and say, but in verse so-and-so, chapter so-and-so, it's stated like this, and we believe this is different. It doesn't matter. At this moment, our shared humanity is more important, and we know that it's only through collaboration that we're going, not conversion. Conversion is another story, but collaboration means that we work together with a common purpose. And I think this is what spirituality is also teaching us, that if I can approach people of other faiths and even no faith at all, with that same vision of having that living being, that humanity, which is the same for all of us, that's shared. If I can see them with that awareness, I can love them and come together and work together so that through our collective energy, we're able to shift things. You know, I read a statistic that approximately 85% of the world's population would say that they ascribe to one faith or another. And so that's a big percentage of humanity. And as we come together and we're able to share our talents and resources together, yes, I think we're going to be able to create a better world for all, a world in which there can be once again truth and justice and love and peace. And if I think about what's in the heart of every human being today, surely it is this. Nobody wants to live in a world of war. Nobody wants to live in a world where there's inequity, because today it might be another part of the world that is experiencing inequity. Tomorrow it might be myself. And so when I come to this awareness, then yes, I know that the only way forward is to come together. And I see this happening everywhere.
Thank you. That's quite interesting. You mentioned that 85% of those, I don't know if you're referring to a survey, 85% of people belong to one faith or another. But I was thinking there's the balance of 15%. And you also mentioned that there's been an effort to reach out to people with no faith. I'm curious, how do you engage in a spiritual dialogue with people who will say they have no faith or will say they don't belong to any particular faith?
Whether they believe in a tradition or they don't, the shared qualities of the human spirit are 5. I would say they're peace, love, truth, joy, and purity. There is no human being who would deny that any of these things are important. And these are the essence of the human spirit. And so when I reach out to another human being with peace, that person is going to respond and say, yes, this is what is important. And so because we share the same spiritual values at the core of our being, our beliefs are another matter, but who we are as human beings are the same.
May I ask what you mean by purity, though?
For me, purity means a cleanliness of heart and intention. And so when I approach you, it's not because I want something from you, but purity in my heart will mean that I'm approaching you because you're my brother and we can support each other. And so purity of intention is perhaps one of the most important things.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to touch on a similar theme with Bishop Joel. Bishop, as you know, we are also a religiously diverse country, but the majority of Filipinos are Roman Catholic. How do you engage in a spiritual dialogue with people of different faiths?
It might interest you to know, Howie and Sister Yenta and all our listeners, in case you have taken it for granted. But the year that is about to end, actually, we go by liturgical seasons. So this theme just ended at the end of the what you call is with the Feast of Christ the King last November 27. Well, what am I talking about? Every year for the last 9 years, since 9 years ago, in preparation for the coming of this 500 years of the arrival of Christianity, which we are celebrating this coming 2021, because it was in 1521 when the Spaniards came with Magellan and Salcedo and Legazpi, bringing to us the faith of Christianity. So the church is celebrating these 500 years of the arrival of the faith. But through this past 9-10 years, there have been themes that the CBCP, the Catholic Bishops' Conference, had identified. And this year that is about to end was about ecumenical dialogue, interreligious dialogue, and dialogue with our indigenous brothers and sisters. So this year had been focused on that. And there have been several efforts, like in my diocese alone, I can only speak for my diocese. When we celebrated the Feast of Pentecost, that feast when we celebrate the Holy Spirit coming down and establishing the church after Jesus Christ resurrected from the dead, we invited our brothers of the Christian faith in an ecumenical celebration, and we listened to their experiences. We let them experience the way they experience and they celebrate the feast of the Holy Spirit coming to them, and it was beautiful. Another situation where we were able to celebrate this dialogue is every time there is a disaster, I am very happy that our differences in faith are broken down and we reach out together as brothers and sisters, and that is a wonderful thing. When there is need, it is most joyful and inspiring to see that our differences are taken for granted or left aside just in order to be able to reach out and help those who are in need. So this is how we concretely experience reaching out. We don't talk about, we see to it that we don't talk about the differences in, doctrine, about the Blessed Virgin Mary and all that. It's not so much that we don't want to discuss that, but there are other reasons for us to be working together towards harmony, towards resolution of certain disorders and difficulties, towards addressing those who are in need, for example, in disasters and calamities. Rather than focusing on what divides us, we focus on what unites us. And that is what Sister Jayanti was saying, that there are these 5 human values that you don't have to believe in God in order to appreciate. As a matter of fact, even more so because we believe in a supreme being, that we appreciate these values and we share them with each other.
Bishop, it's interesting that you mentioned disasters, right? And we do know that whenever there is a disaster, there inevitably will be people who will say that it was an act of God, right? Yeah. Even though we know that it may be true, but we also know that there are also scientific causes for things like flash floods.
Yes.
There are man-made causes for some of the disasters that strike the world, right?
Yeah.
How do you manage this? What do you say to people? I mean, you yourself, you're an educated man, but there are many people who don't know the science behind a lot of things that happen in the world. I mean, we've been talking about climate change, but closer to your backyard, we've had a number of disasters in the Bicol region. You mentioned a volcanic eruption, etc. How do you manage this seeming conflict, or this? Is there a conflict between science and faith? And how do you manage this when you discuss these events with your flock?
Yes, I must say at the very outset that those who say immediately that this is an act of God, it's a form of punishment from God because you have been bad and all that, have already become low. I mean, fewer in numbers. There are fewer, and usually these are those who have grown with their own old philosophies and spiritualities. So, but more importantly, precisely because of our awareness of climate change, for example, of our responsibility for Mother Earth. And again, we go back to Pope Francis for this beautiful encyclical Laudato Si, teaching us to learn to love Mother Earth. Creation is our responsibility. This is our common home, etc. Then we have been able to focus attention on this, on looking at this, and telling people, no, God is not accountable. We are responsible for what is happening. God maybe has tolerated us like he has tolerated COVID to happen so that we may remember that we need him. If this did not happen, chances are we would still go on our selfish ways and become more even selfish and destroy one another in the end. So the Lord maybe allows it, but I don't think it is his decision to punish us. It is something that it is part of the law of nature. If you abuse nature, nature gets back at you. I think that's as simple as that. And we have learned to realize that, especially in our situation. So fewer and fewer people say, oh, God is angry again, that he's punishing us. But instead, it is good to say, okay, because you feel that you're being punished. What could have been the cause of this punishment? Because you have been selfish, because you've been cheating your neighbor or your spouse, all that. So things like that. But we don't want to focus on those ideas because they kind of miss the point. We are being challenged now to look at the more important realities that when these things happen, it's because of us. We are responsible and therefore we have to be accountable.
I'd like to ask Sister the same question. I'm sure, and maybe in some of your own circles, you might have heard that certain phenomena in the world are attributed to acts of God. How do you usually respond?
I think superstition exists across the world. And so it's part of that old mindset of superstition. And I say to them, a parent today will have nothing but love in their hearts for their offspring and will want to support them and help them move forward. And so surely the one who is the divine creator has nothing but love in his or her heart for all of us. And so these are not acts of God. These are the things that we have brought on ourselves, paying no regard to the rights of nature, the rights of animals. And so this is now the comeback that's reaching us, in which we are now the recipients of that aggression of nature and even wildlife in different ways. And so when I explained that there's something which is called the law of karma, and the law of karma means the law of action. Whatever action I perform, there is an equal and opposite rebound that comes straight to me. So I am responsible and I am accountable. And I think that, just like the word yoga has now become universal, people understand, or maybe they don't understand the significance, but they know the word yoga. And yoga actually means union of the inner being with the divine. In the same way, they've heard this word karma, which means action, but it means that if I'm putting out what is good, what comes back to me is also the same. It's good. And if I'm putting out what is bad, whether in thoughts or words or actions, what is going to come back to me is of that same caliber, the boomerang effect. And so once people begin to think a little bit more about these things, they begin to understand and appreciate that, yes, this is what is going on. But of course, at this moment, what's important is not even to say, well, this happened, that happened, and the other happened. What's important is, what can we do about it today? And so for me to develop that feeling of respect for nature and all forms of life, and to be able to have that awareness of human dignity for myself and know that no one can take away my own dignity, but I have to make sure I keep it and see others with that respect and dignity. So karma is teaching me what I need to do at this moment, not just to say, oh, woe is me, now what can I do about it? But no, okay, whatever has happened, how do I sort it out and put it right at this moment? So understanding the law of karma is a very important ingredient in terms of spirituality and being able to take the right steps forward for the future.
Thank you. That's a clear explanation of karma. You know, sister, I feel I must ask you about the role of gender in governance, because you know, you are a woman leader of a movement in a world that is still dominated by men, and you know, the pandemic has highlighted the role of women leaders. I read an article, whether anyone agrees with it or not, that said that, is it any coincidence that the countries that have been most successful at addressing the pandemic are led by women? And it cited countries from Europe, Asia, you know, North America, etc. No, I'm wondering whether you see any pattern in that. Is that just a coincidence, or whether you think there is a relevance of gender in governance? Does it make any difference? And the second part of the question is, when you talk to other leaders about climate change, especially male leaders, does your gender come into play? Is it an advantage or a disadvantage?
Thank you for that question. And if I might just take an extra moment to explain something. The founder of our organization had a series of visions in 1936. His name was Brahma Baba. And he saw a world in which there was justice and peace and harmony. And of course, the question was how? And what he understood was that it would be through education. And it would be through a process of education that people's consciousness would change and there could be such a world created. He looked around the world in which he was living and he saw that the most glaring aspect of inequality was gender, because he was born in a place called Sindh, which today is in Pakistan. At that moment, it was United India. And so he decided that he would give the role of teachers and administrators to the women, the first step of affirmative action, you might say. So this was in 1936, 37, so quite a way before these ideas became known. And so today also Brahma Kumaris is the only spiritual organization that caters for men and women, but has women as its leaders through its constitution. And so we very much understand that in order to create a world of equality, the most basic aspect of inequality has to be addressed. And so that means giving women that opportunity so that they can move forward and create that better world. And your question about governance, yes, definitely, whether it's the women in Finland, whether it's the sister in New Zealand, whether it's different places that you've mentioned, yes, I think that when it's women who have leadership roles, what's been found is that if they are involved within the whole peace movement and organizations working for peace and signing peace treaties, the likelihood of where it's women in leadership, the peace movement and the peace that's impacted is likely to last for a longer period of time than otherwise. And if you think about all the peace treaties which don't involve women and how long they've been able to last, you can see that there's quite a difference there. So yes, I think that women have, in a very natural way, not just the left side of the brain in which there's logic and reason that kicks in, but the right side of the brain that is looking at things of compassion and feelings and looking at things from a different dimension. And so that all-round perspective is something that generally women are much more capable of. And that's not to say men don't have it. We have examples like President Mandela. We have examples like Mahatma Gandhi, who managed to have both the masculinity but also the feminine values. And so I think this is definitely something that needs looking at if you're thinking about a world of peace, a world of justice, and a world of love.
Yes, thank you for that. It's just interesting that the men that you mentioned are men from the past. But yes.
I'd love to have examples of present men leaders. I'm sorry, I don't have a single one.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's very enlightening. I want to ask Bishop, because we've been talking about peace, but at the same time, Bishop Joel, you mentioned that the Pope has spoken out strongly against war. And as you know, in the Philippines and in many parts of Asia, there have been continuous conflicts with various roots and causes. What solutions? What solutions have not been tried yet? We've heard all kinds of ideas for peace in the Philippines and elsewhere. What kind of inspiration can we get from the Pope, and what kinds of solutions should we start trying now?
Personally, I don't think it's solutions that we need. I think what we need is the right attitude. If I am coming from wrong position from the very start of a dialogue, that dialogue will never prosper. If I am coming from a position, for example, of advantage, that I am the stronger and the other is the weaker, I have all the reason to be selfish because I have so much to lose. If these things if I start with in dialogue in this position and situation, I don't think dialogue, and no good solution will be able to help me, and for that matter, the other person I'm dialoguing with. So again, if I may, I'd like to use what the Holy Father used as a beautiful model in Fratelli Tutti, and that's the model of the Good Samaritan. You see, the Good Samaritan was a disadvantaged person. You know that the Samaritans were being looked down at during the time of Jesus. As a matter of fact, in this very parable, at the end of the parable, when Jesus said, because the parable was triggered off by the question of a lawyer, and the Lord gave him this parable of the Good Samaritan, and because the lawyer said, "Now who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor?" And at the end of the parable, after, I'm sure you're familiar with the parable, the Samaritan helped the wounded person and then healed. Jesus at the end asked him, "So who is neighbor to this man who fell victim to robbers?" The lawyer said, "The one who helped him." He did not mention the Samaritan. He did not say the Samaritan, because using the word Samaritan was too much for him to say. It was something that he would rather not mention, because the Samaritan was in fact a contrabida, an enemy of the Jews. So something like that. There always be biases. And again, these are mindsets that So the parable that Jesus offered, and it is a parable of himself. The way he dealt with people, from the prostitute to the sinners, from Mary Magdalene to Peter himself to Judas and all that. He was the one who had the attitude of welcoming, treating everybody as brothers and sisters. So I think the Holy Father is telling us, start by being a brother to everyone. In fact, that parable, that Good Samaritan, it has a very significant question. When the lawyer asked, "Who is my neighbor?" And the parable was not saying that the man who was in need was your neighbor. What ended in the story was that the man who helped was the neighbor. And that is the point of Jesus. Don't ask yourself, who is my neighbor here? Is the one who is the drunkard or the prostitute? Is the one who is in need? No. Am I a neighbor to them? That's the more important thing. And to be a neighbor, I have to be a brother or sister to the other. To be a neighbor is to be able to respect
Mm. Did we lose Bishop Joel?
Yeah, I'm sorry. What do you call this? I got somebody was trying to call, so I could not turn it off. Anyway, so that's what I'm saying. You know,
Mm.
I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
No problem.
What it calls glitches in the internet. Anyway, going back to the neighbor parable, it's that. So for me, it is all an attitude, a mindset. If I am willing to be open, any strategy, any means to reach out would be effective for as long as I am willing to be in dialogue and to respect the rights of others, human rights, as Sister Yanti was saying something like that, and to be able to appreciate my own goodness and the interconnectedness of everyone. I think that's what the Holy Father is trying to say.
Yeah. Okay. We need to start winding down this part of the evening. Of course, we're still far from finished. Bishop, I'll just ask one final question for the both of you. Maybe I can start with Sister. Yeah. Okay. Well, is it okay? Are you hearing me, Bishop? Yeah. Well, I just want to go back to one of our original themes, which is this has been the pandemic year. This year has been very difficult for everyone. We cannot. It's most of us have been locked down. We cannot travel. We cannot see loved ones. Some of us have gotten sick. We've known people. I know 4 people who have passed away because of COVID. It's been a sad year, but what gives you hope, though? What gives you hope for the coming year? I'll ask you first, Bishop, then we can end this session with Sister. What gives you hope? What can we bring? What message can we bring into the new year, 2021?
It's been 9 months, more or less, since we got our lockdown here in my province in particular. And the initial, what do you call this, initial response was precisely fear and anxiety. People were so helpless. And unfortunately, I must say that this had a very bad impact on some of our young people. As a matter of fact, there were several cases of suicide having succeeded in my province, in my diocese. So, and 95% of these were done by young people. So there was a terrible, what I call this, impact on the lives of these very sensitive souls, unable to really cope with the loss of freedom, the initiative that they wanted to do to build their own and plans and desires and all that. And at the same time, feeling lost because of the loss of connectivity. Of course, all of a sudden we learn to appreciate this, webinars, the internet, being able to, that education is now online and all that. But at the same time, there is one beautiful thing that for me allowed this situation allowed us to encounter, our need for God. A lot of people, of course, here, when we had the lockdown, no churches were open for the longest time, especially during the Holy Week, which was the most important part of the year. When we would reflect on the death and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, we could not celebrate a single mass with a congregation. Everything was online. And so there was a lot of that sense of longing for God, especially at that point when you are invited to experience the death of God in your life. And for me, it's not just a matter of losing the image of Jesus, seeing him stretched out in the Sancto Encero, the what do you call this, the dead Christ, which we process in the streets during Holy Week. But it is precisely the experience of death, the death of faith, the death of hope, the death of love, the death of life itself. And then all of a sudden we would be able to rise because of the resurrection. But that was not so pronounced because of the lockdown. But somehow people learn to get into that experience of loss and longing. This is for me the opening to what we call hope. People learn to look forward to. As a matter of fact, people are beginning to flock back to the churches. I'm very happy because at least here in the province, already 50% of our congregation are allowed to gather in the churches. Especially now with Christmas coming, we have this traditional simbang gabi, early morning masses, and we have difficulties in how to control the crowds. But we are seeing to it that all the social protocols, social distancing, mask, etc., will still be followed. But people are beginning to respond to that sense of loss. It is something like experiencing light in the midst of darkness. It is only when you are in the dark that you appreciate light. And for me, that was the spiritual experience during this lockdown. This is what COVID gave us, to experience light in the midst of this darkness, to experience life again, even when there was deaths. There were deaths here and there. And we were even very much aware that it could be me. Tomorrow, it could be me. I could be the one with to be declared COVID positive. And so that anxiety, that helplessness, and therefore the need to rely on the goodness of a loving God. And somehow, this is what has become the emphasis in many of our spiritual circles. Of course, the political scenario is a totally different thing with all the fake news and the trolls and all that, the negative, hopeless images, presumptions, and etc. So, despite all this, for me, I am very hopeful that 2021 would be a new way of the new normal. Would have a totally different thing because, or meaning rather, because of the faith. Because of the faith. But there is one other thing that I would like to, if I may, just as a parable that for me is very significant. It is maybe a parable that you have heard already before. This is the story of two brothers who were very close to each other until a disagreement made them disagree, and it totally separated them. And one morning, this one brother wakes up that there's a very big moat, a river between his property and the property of his brother, because they had divided the property between the two of them, because precisely of the animosity. So there was a river and he could no longer cross that river. It was so big and so deep, a manifestation that the brother didn't want to have anything to do with him. So one morning, there was this stranger who was looking for a job. He said, "Do you build walls?" I said, "Yes, I can do anything. I'm a jack of all trades. So I want you to build the wall as high as you can because I want to show my brother that I'm responding to the river that he has built. I'm building a wall here in order to tell him that I will have nothing to do with him anymore forever and ever." So that, okay, no problem. And this man says, "I'm going downtown. I'll be back in a day or two. So do everything. You have all the materials. You build the wall." 2 days later, he comes back, ready to pay the man for whatever his work. And to his surprise, it was a bridge, not a wall that he built. A bridge crossing the river. He was so angry, but because before he could castigate or he could kill the man because of what he did, he saw his brother crossing the bridge with open arms, telling him almost in a shout, "Brother, I'm very sorry. I did not know that your heart is open to welcome me back." Only to realize that it was the best decision that would have ever happened. And they ran to each other, embraced. Build bridges, not walls. If we can do this, I think the whole world will be a totally different place.
Thank you.
Amen.
That's just a sweet message. Build bridges, not walls. Sister, what message of hope can we bring into the new year?
I want to go back to your question a little while ago, because of course it had me reflecting, and I realized that the Holy Father actually is a person who really loves equality and justice and has that balance in which there is compassion, But I think the problem lies in the bureaucracy that surrounds him. And so it's difficult for him to make decisions that can allow women to move forward, even within his own church. And so that's a shame. But my hope is that because here is a man who does understand the power of equality and the justice of equality, maybe something will shift even in my lifetime in the Catholic Church. Now, that's a big statement, but there's a hope there. And yes, also what gives me hope for the future is, I would say, very similar things to what Brother Bishop Joel has mentioned. And one is that I also saw people moving forward to support each other with compassion. A lovely story of a woman who inspired, and this is while I was in India for the first period of lockdown through till July. And I read this lovely story of how this woman thought, what can I do for those who are homeless and without food? I can make 10 extra chapatis. But what she did was to phone around, and 10 other women decided to do the same. And so she had a stack of 100 chapatis that she could deliver to the food bank, where they were preparing packets of giving food to people who needed it. And so the initiative of one woman, and it sparked a lot across India. And so many others began to do the same. Even if I can do this much, maybe it will inspire 10 others, 100 others to do the same. And the multiplication of that energy can grow and amazing things can happen. So compassion and kindness are there within human hearts, and we just need to open up our hearts and celebrate in the way that we're doing tonight and expose those qualities, and things will happen. And the second thing is that we have a gathering every morning at all our centers, whether the Philippines or the UK, everywhere. And until June the 18th this year, all our places of worship were shut. And then from June the 18th, then it was restricted openings, and gradually things could happen. And of course, we're restricted by numbers in terms of social distance of how many can come, which is fine. But what we found was that people were coming back with such love and deep appreciation of a place that was sacred, where they would be able to take spiritual benefit from. So that was one aspect. And the other one was the support of the spiritual community. They also appreciated that greatly. And so I see that these are signs of hope for the future for 2021. The natural compassion of human hearts, and I hope that that continues to open and develop, and we see more of that in future, whether it's COVID or COVID finishes, but we'll see more of that. And secondly, this love for that which is sacred, and to be able to come together with no other motive except to celebrate and to honor that which is sacred and the one who's up above. And so I'm seeing that these two things offer a lot of hope for 2021.
Thank you. That was very uplifting. Thank you. Okay. We have now. It is time, sister, for you to lead us in a meditation experience. So I will kind of fade into the background as you kind of take over this meeting.
Thank you very much. Just carry on sitting comfortably. We are not going to expect you to stand on your head or sit on the floor or anything like that. Just carry on. And what I'm going to do is to speak out my own thoughts in reflection and invite you to follow these ideas. Sitting quietly, I reflect on the things that I've been hearing about, the human qualities that unite us, the sacred awareness of the one up above, the divine being, the being of light, the source of all goodness, the creator. the benefactor, the ocean of love, the ocean of peace, the compassionate one. Not only are my thoughts drawn to the one above, but as I begin to feel that divine presence, it awakens the goodness inherent within the human spirit. In the presence of the ocean of love, the power of love emerges within the soul. And as I begin to feel pure, unconditional love from the divine, I feel the eternal bond that holds us all together as a human family. Through eternity, the creation is held together with the thread of love. We share a common home, a common parent, and at this moment, aware of the crisis facing humanity, we share a common purpose. Aware of this eternal bond of love, I'm willing to allow my heart to open up and forgive. I forgive those who have caused pain. And I send subtle thoughts of love to those whom I have caused pain. And as my heart is filled with the unconditional love that comes from the divine, not only can I forgive, but I can also let go. And as I let go, I find freedom and peace. In this sacred month of December, I know that this is what I must do. Be able to have nothing but pure feelings and good wishes for all. For my brother who is close and my brother who seems far away. But to have good wishes for all. I hold this experience of love. And I come back to the moment here and now. But I keep with myself this pure feeling of love. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Jayanti, for meditation. So greetings of peace to all our esteemed guests. Her Excellency Vice President, Lenny Roberto, Sister Jayanti Kriplani, Bishop Joel Bailon, Mr. Howie Sivariano, our profound thanks for sharing with us your insights on the significance of allowing our hearts and mind to be open to the world. I would also like to express our heartfelt gratitude to all our partners, organizations, groups, individuals who have been part of the BK Pause Muna, Peace Muna webinar series. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Thank you very much. Om Shanti.
Thank you. Thank you, Sister Rajni, National Coordinator of BK Philippines. Now we're going to have a short ceremony, virtual giving of bouquet of flowers by Mr. June Serrano to our guests. Mr. June Serrano is the president of the Brahma Kumaris Philippines Spiritual Foundation Incorporated. Mr. Serrano?
Thank you, Mr. Howie. Mr. Jayanti, on behalf of the Brahma Kumaris Philippines, we give you this bouquet of flowers as our token of deep appreciation and gratitude of your presence in this program. This one is for Most Reverend Bishop Joel Bailon. On behalf of Brahma Kumaris, please accept this bouquet of flowers as our way of saying thank you, filled with love and respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Serrano. And now there's going to be some announcements by Ms. Merly Pimentel of the Pause Muna, Peace Muna, our coordinator.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Before we present to you our future programs, I would like to acknowledge the presence of our partners, the Philippine Nurses Association, Cebu Chapter, Piston, Rise Against Hunger, DSWD, Pamulaan, Department of Education, DRRMS, the National Convention for Muslim Filipinos, John Carroll Institute of Church and Social Issues, PASCO, that is the Philippine Association of Sari-Sari Store and Carinderia Owners. We have the Global Catholic Climate Movement, Filipinas, and Insight Government or Inside Gov. And now let me present to you our future programs, and I hope you can join us on December 20. Can we have the... Yes, we have an international guest who's going to give us a class or seminar on God's Loving Heart, a gift for all season. This is on Saturday, December 19, 2020 at 4:00 p.m. And of course, as a gift to all our participants, those who have been with us and those who are listening at the other social platform, Facebook, as well as YouTube. We would like to invite you for meditation for peace and harmony. This will be on December 28 and 22 at 6 to 7 p.m. So thank you very much. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all.
Thank you for those announcements. And I guess it's up to me to kind of just wrap this up. But before we end, I just want to say thank you to all of you for inviting me. And in particular, I'd like to thank our two guests, especially Sister Genti and Bishop Joel. Such uplifting messages. It's very personal for me. I don't know if all of you are familiar, but I was a COVID patient myself, one of the first patients in the Philippines, and I went through a lot in my 11 days of illness. And when I came out of it, I was thinking about how will I overcome this trauma? And reading up, I realized that there's more than just PTSD as an outcome of trauma. It's more than just post-traumatic stress disorder. There's something called post-traumatic growth. And I think that's what we're all looking for as we're living through this pandemic. We're all traumatized by it in one way or another. And we're all looking for some form of growth, and we want to avoid any permanent wounds and any permanent damage to ourselves. And to me, part of the growth has been seeing the paradoxes of our time, which is there's so much emphasis on distancing from each other, and yet we're discovering new ways of connecting. This is a new way of connecting. I do not think that if there's no pandemic, we would have connected in this way. It would have been very difficult for us to all see each other eyeball. But we've discovered these new ways of being close, the opposite of distancing. So that's another paradox of our times. But post-traumatic growth, I read, does not come naturally. It needs work and it needs focus. And one of the keys to post-traumatic growth is simply thinking of others and helping others survive this time, so that in the coming months, we all begin to thrive again. So I just want to thank you all again for sharing this special moment. And may we all have holidays of connection, closeness, peace, and love. Maligayang Pasko. Magbuhay tayong lahat. Merry Christmas. May we all live happily in the coming year. Thank you.